Hi, this is Tim and Joel. Welcome to Midwest Hunting and Outdoors by Two Dumbasses,
a podcast about the outdoors, hunting,
and being a steward of the land.
Welcome to Midwest Hunting and Outdoors by the Two Dumbasses. This is our first episode, and we are excited to introduce a very dear friend and a special guest for us, JB Hunter Extraordinaire. Hi, Joe. Welcome to our podcast.
Thanks for having me. This is exciting times. Glad to support your launch of this podcast.
Thanks, Joe. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you?
Well, as you mentioned, a lifelong friend here. Actually met at the office, hunted with you, and our family's kids grew up together. As far as hunting, I believe I got late start at it. Probably started bow hunting when I was 21 years old after I graduated school. Before that, my father got me into hunting. Did a lot of small game, pheasant and rabbits. I think we all probably went that avenue. But it wasn't until Iowa when I moved here after going to school locally. Stayed in the area, met a lady from Iowa, and ended up sticking around and introduced myself with some other guys and bow hunting, and it's been a lifelong journey since.
I think you're being a little modest, Joe. We're sitting actually in Joe's cabin, and this is kind of his getaway place, and we don't have the cameras set up to show, but if we were to show around his place, you would see some great deer mounts and turkey mounts in his place. So he's really a great hunter. So, Joe, what have you been doing?
Yeah, we'll see if we can bribe Joe with some beer later on, and maybe we can get some video attached here, right? So.
So we all have properties, and why don't we spend a little bit of time talking about what we've been doing? I mean, the weather's been cooperating with us, so what have you guys all been doing here in the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, this week for me, I had the DNR come out and do a resurvey of our forests, which was exciting. It's been 3+ years since we did TSI and they first came out, so it was it was a good time for them to come out and revisit what work we had done.
So you say TSI, what do you mean by that?
So tree stand improvement. We'll touch on that in a future episode. But basically, you're identifying the trees that are good on your property, and then around those trees, you're eliminating its competition. Trying to open up the canopy, get sunlight to the ground. It's really made a big difference on our property.
That's awesome.
So that was this weekend, and then just a couple days ago, it's been hotter than Billy Blazes and raining in between, so trying to get some Roundup on my beans for my food plots to kill some weeds, and here we are.
Awesome.
How about you, Joe?
I started last year putting in some clover, just a little trial and error. Tried to last 2 years basically study the travel patterns of the deer. Tried to station my plots in their path, able to pattern them pretty consistently, and the way I look at the way my land is right now, it's kind of a corridor between their bedding area and the local neighbors' field. So it looks like a little bit of a appetizer on their way to the smorgasbord or the buffet. So through that studies and through those actions, started seeing some consistent activity. And over the last 2 weeks, I was able to plant some beans and some corn and micro plots. I'm only dealing with 60 acres. I want to get up to maybe 3 to 5% of the acres as far as food plots, and just kind of trial and error.
Oh, fun.
How about you, Tim?
So my food plots are kind of already preordained this year. I've got last year I had a little more variety, but this year I've got field corn put on my food plots. Probably be the last time I have corn on my property. I just signed up all my arable acres to CRP for the next 15 years. So what I've been doing, we bought a small parcel of ground here this last fall, and actually through Pheasants Forever, we were able to acquire some sunflower seeds and some sorghum. So I ended up tilling up a clover field, probably 2/3 of an acre, not a lot, but all in strips, and planted a bunch of sunflowers and sorghum. And it's all starting to come up, looks good. I didn't get it done exactly how I'd want to. I normally would have sprayed it after I tilled it up, but the rain was coming, so it is what it is. And then as you guys know, I built a pond on that property, so I'm really ready. We're in the process of getting ready to stock that, but more on that later. So, you think about, for us, once you get into spring out of the winter, it's really kind of a race to hunting season, isn't it?
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, winter's coming, as they say, right? Winter is right around the corner. Yeah, I shared this with you guys earlier, but I'm already watching deer hunting videos on TV, trying to get my mind right for the season coming up. So it's fun.
That's true. It's year round. It's kind of like athletics these days. Kids are in baseball, football all year round, doing workouts and episodes. It's basically athletes for deer hunting.
Yep. Do you guys find, I find for myself that the plan and preparation for the season, predominantly whitetail hunting, is just as enjoyable for me as getting ready for as the hunting part. Because for me, it's all about, hey, I'm planning, I'm trying to understand my property, as you described, Joe, a little bit earlier, and it takes time to figure out the deer paths. There's tools at our luxury with regards to, we have trail cameras, etc. But trying to figure that out, put in the food plots, understand what our neighbors are doing, and then does it all come together in October, November? Do you guys find that?
Yeah, it's the thrill of seeing the plan come together, like you mentioned. It's the hard work and effort paid in the hot months of the year, and it's plentiful in the end. And to be able to score or harvest a mature buck at the end of it, that's everyone's goal, right? And to see all the components, can't control Mother Nature. Yes, hopefully she's on her side when you're planting, and you get your nutrients in the soil where you need to be, and how do you attract those deer? How do you get them to stay on your land versus roam through? That's a challenge, and that's excitement when you see it all come together.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. It's that, and then you try to learn from your mistakes from the previous year. It's not like you make a mistake today and you can learn from it and make a change tomorrow. It's a whole season away, right? When it comes to crops and food plots and tree stand locations and things like that. So I think I made a lifetime of mistakes last year. So I'm trying to correct about half of them this year, and we'll see what happens.
Well, and so let's talk about that. What are some of those things you're trying to correct from previous years?
Yeah, the largest mistake I made last year, and really leading into last year is and we'll talk about my property in a little bit, but it's got great sanctuary. It's got great woods in it. Really no bedding area. It's not going to hold deer. So I've got to give the deer a reason to be there, and that's food. It's got a great creek system, water, but that's readily available on most people's lands. So that's my main mistake up to this year was getting enough food on my property to house deer and want them to come to my property. So I experimented last year with some, I won't name the brand, but some, a mix of peas and sun hemp and everything else, and it ended up just being a field of foxtail. So not only did I not get deer in to eat it, but now I'm fighting all the weeds that were there.
Yeah, you planted for the next year,
right? So if I can get that corrected this year, I'll be very, very happy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Joe, same question. I mean, anything you're trying to correct for this year that you did from last year?
I think take advantage of the pinch points. I hunted next to them the last 2 years, but as I think about it and I look at the reoccurrence of trail cam pictures over the years, the last 2 or 3 years, starting to see that trend. Pinch points is critical. I deviated from them early on as my food plots become more plentiful and are stable. Then from those pinch points, and they move out to the food plots, and it's a combination of both, I guess. To kind of talked in circles there, but pinch points and food plots are kind of my strategy for this year as far as getting them hardy and do some hinge cutting to kind of divert them towards trees that would be suitable for deer stands. I've got some that are pretty mature trees I can use, but then I got a lot of undergrowth too. So just trying to reroute deer.
Okay.
I mean, we took a tour of your property before we started the podcast, and your work is really showing out there as far as the amount of plots and food that you're trying to get established.
It's getting there. One struggle I do have is the layout of my land and the access to it. It's hard to get back to the back 40 of my land without being detected. So it's going to be all timing and my travel patterns up the main path. It's got to be critical times of the day to get into that stand before it become detected or the deer move in. But that's probably the one thing when I looked at your reference, we'll probably talk a little bit later about it is, but on choice of my land, I've got a lot of variety. But probably the number one thing is how do I access the back 40 without being detected? Big challenge.
So, this seems like a logical entry point. Joe, you were the first one of the three of us to acquire land. And why don't you just tell us a little bit about your property and some of the challenges with it, but also some of the real nuggets of beauty about it that attracted you to it.
Well, I think the first thing is, it was a dream, and as you mentioned, chasing the dream is my wife and I were linked at the hip in regards to eventually owning our own property. I was fortunate enough that she allows me to hunt and doesn't really cry much about it. But from that perspective, I saw some property. First step is know what your budget is, right? What you can afford, because I didn't want to spend time looking at property that was out of our price range, and I didn't want to waste people's time. So when keep surfing the net and was able to come up with this property, kind of had a wild hair, and my son and I came out and looked at it. So with that, we ended up came out. The current owner, allowed us to take his ATV and go wherever we wanted on the land, so that was pretty nice there. And then went home, and she ended up saying, "Hey, let's go look at it," which shocked me. I know we're on the same page, but she thought, this is really could happen. So it's like awesome. But a couple of key things looking at the land is, history, right? The previous owner was able to give me the history of the last 10 years that he lived on it or owned it. Saw pictures of what he harvested, and he had a good selection of mature bucks. So I knew that the genetics, were key based off of the history he was able to share with me. Another thing I looked at to purchase it is a variation in, the land itself. I've got bluffs. I got creek bottoms that are flowing year round. I've got CRP, 20 acres of my 60 are in CRP. The back 40 is in forestry. In there, I've got a mix of hardwoods, and I've got a little bit of pasture up top, and I got a lot of cedars, as you saw we drove through today, that are each year getting thicker and thicker for potential, good bedding grounds and sanctuaries. And then, the other thing that's up in the air, unless you do a little bit of searching and investigating, is you've got to have neighbors that are lined up with you, right? You don't want people just as brown it's down mentality. I can say probably three out of 4 of my neighbors are out there conservation, and they're trying to get mature bucks, and it's paid off. So a couple key elements, but yeah, just if it moves, shoot, I'm against that totally. So
it's a big deal.
Joe, how long have you owned the land now?
I'm going on 5.5 years now.
Yeah.
We're here in Jones County, eastern Iowa, and quiet, dead end road, and it's just love it out here.
Yeah, it's beautiful
Yeah, you do have
property.
beautiful
Thank you.
property. Yeah.
So Joe, why don't you tell us about your property?
Yeah, my property is located in southern Iowa, and my wife and I'm fortunate enough that my wife hunts with me. She figured out after we got married that hey, if I'm going to spend any significant time during the fall and winter with my husband, I'm going to have to learn how to hunt because I wasn't around. And we had some changes in our family. I grew up hunting on my family farm. And my parents were getting older. My dad passed away, family dynamics and all that fun stuff. But the end of it is just hunting back home became harder and harder and more difficult. Wasn't as convenient. Didn't mean the same. And my wife and I discussed it. We felt it was time to really start looking for our own property. And so we searched the web. We really didn't reach out to any realtors at that point in time, but we really did a lot of scouring, and we had some criteria, and I'll talk about those a little bit later maybe, but criteria and what we wanted in land. And the big thing is on our land is we wanted to be able to potentially build a house on it, but for sure a cabin. Because it was going to be probably located significantly far from where we were employed and where our residence was, at least for a temporary period of time. So, for over a year, we looked on the internet, and Joe, I don't know if you found this, but when you're scouring the internet, after about a month, you get a pretty good mental picture of what products are out there,
Yep,
right?
definitely.
What land's out there. And then after that, it's like, okay, what new items are out there, or what other things can I be looking at, to find new land that's for sale. So, so I started thinking about that, and I said, well, what about these small town real estate places? They've got they may have something posted on their website that they're selling that's not on the big websites.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I came across this land, believe it or not, is a little website in small town Iowa, and they had it posted, and it seemed the right price. To your point, and budget-wise was a big deal for us, which it should be. And then it seemed to have everything that we really needed, and a few things that that came with it that we wanted. And so we called the realtor and said, hey, we'd really like to look at this land. He goes, well, here's where it's at. You want to just go and walk it and look at it. And this was February, if I remember right, and it's cold. And my wife and I drive a car down there, and she's holding her dog, and we're walking through the woods, and it's anyway, it was an adventure, but I think we immediately fell in love with it. Just the layout of the land and the idea of having your own land, and the price was right. And a couple months later, we owned it.
Why don't you talk a little bit about the topography of your land? And talk a little bit about some of the work you've done to make it to what you have, because you've done a lot of work, a great effort.
Yeah, thank you. It's 56 acres. It's located in southern Iowa, and for folks that have been in southern Iowa, it's there's some flat land, and then there's gullies. That's kind of the options you've got in southern Iowa, and but the genetics for deer and wildlife are just insane down there. And so we have 4 acres that's non-wooded, and the rest of it's wooded. And our property is amongst probably 500 to 600 acres of wooded property contained in gravel roads, surrounded by gravel roads. And the other thing about southern Iowa, it's not gridded. Every mile there's a gravel road. The roads are put in where they're able to put a road in, where the gullies aren't.
It goes on
there.
forever.
Right.
So the first thing we did when we bought the property is we burnt the 4 acres. We tried to get our cabin site going, and we were just fortunate when we bought it that it was like the wettest May in history there, like 28 inches. Our neighbor said, hey, I got 28 inches of rain in the month of May. And here we are. We just bought it in April, and we're up to our knees in mud and trying to get a cabin built. And and all that. But so what we did is our main objective was, get the cabin construction going, but then from a hunting standpoint, we needed access to the property, and we felt, we needed at least logging roads or paths to get tractors / UTVs down there, ATVs, and so that was kind of our first year objective. We hung a couple tree stands, and we started hunting.
I'll never forget when you bought that property and all the moisture that we had gotten, and you were putting in a road. So
Gravel, rock.
You were putting a small investment. It's like taking money and just watching it disappear in the mud.
Dirt.
Yeah, I calculated I needed 8 loads of gravel, and 4 of them went about 8 feet. but the good news is they went about 20 feet down.
Got a good foundation.
Good foundation. And then I figured, that was one of my first true lessons that hey, you can't fight Mother Nature. She always wins, and she always does.
That was great. I'll tell you a little bit about my property. Very similar to you guys is budget's always a key thing. Joel actually ended up, someone told him about, his neighbor told him about this property. I ended up going to look at it, fit within my budget needs, and so my wife and I went down to take a look, and it hit a lot of our criteria. So we ended up purchasing the property. It was kind of the right timing in our lives. And I think that's another important thing, and we'll talk more about that maybe next week, the importance of timing. But for us, the timing was good. We bought that property, and we just continue to make enhancements to it. So we just recently bought just a little bit over 23 acres, put in another pond. So our property is kind of rolling hills, has some tillable acres. The soil's horrible, so it needs to be healed. So we're putting it into CRP to heal that conservation reserve program to heal that soil, and then like I said, we have a couple ponds, and then timber.
Yeah, great land, both of you guys. I'm envious.
Well,
Very nice. Very
I don't
nice.
think you have anything to be envious of, Joe.
The cool thing is our past, right? Working for a long time together at the same company. Ended up kind of, though separate as far as myself in eastern Iowa versus southwest Iowa. The journeys that we have, we all bought land. We all have, could say, houses. We've got supporting wives, which is huge in regards to supporting our needs, in regards to our passions. And it's just, I'm just honored to be here today because this is cool, talking about how we made that journey, sitting back and doing that.
You're working on stuff all the time. It's hard to stop and reflect back on really where you've been, right?
Yeah,
So
definitely.
that's part of it. The other thing, Joe, that I would mention would be is even though we've kind of got all the land, all of us have land and on this journey, there's, even though it's land and it's hunting land, there's a lot of commonality. There's also some very uniqueness about the 3 lands that we have.
It's
right?
true. That is true.
So some great discussion, guys, and I think it's a logical spot for us to kind of talk about chasing the dream. It's the title of our episode. How and what and where? How do we get to where we're at? And what advice would you pass on to our listeners? I think let's just start there, Joe. I mean, if I can key on you first as our guest.
I think a lot of it's having a vision and then putting action to it. It's it's something that didn't happen overnight. It's I believe you have a plan. The plan can deviate and you can get derailed periodically, but it's an end goal. It's like anything. You've got a plan. You put maybe some type of strategy to achieve it, and then you start whittling away at it little by little. It took me 20 years to get where I wanted to go, right? To be able to actually have the land, starting hunting public land at 21, nothing wrong with public land, but it was always nice to someday have your own property that you don't have to walk in and your tree stand's either taken or you run across somebody that decides to put their tree stand right up to the next tree or 10 yards away, and we've all experienced that, and that's frustrating. But I think of it, it's a hat of a plan, and just take little steps towards achieving that plan. It's kind of it.
I mean, I kind of liken it to the Dave Ramsey plan, right? So for us, we had to put the Dave Ramsey plan in place to save up to be able to afford property, because I did not want to have a big loan on the property I was going to buy. Certainly it's an option for some people. It just wasn't an option for us.
True.
Yeah, what I would add, Joe, is I think you're spot on. But what I would add is I think you got to check yourself and make sure that you and your spouse, you and your significant other, is this really what we want to do? Because this isn't like buying a car, and if you don't like it, you can trade it in, kind of thing. It's a pretty big decision and a pretty big road to go down. And I think a lot of people want to own land, but when they get it, is it really what they want? So I think that's at least where my wife and I started was, is this really what we want? And then let's think out, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, what would this look like?
It really has to be a joint decision. I mean,
Definitely.
Otherwise, I really think you give you in a spot to where they're going to blame you later on, right? I mean, so you got to make that joint decision.
Exactly. And it's a stepping stone. When we bought this land, we had a vision that we're going to live on it, right? With that vision came living in a house, living in a shed for 2 years. I mean, in this house, the shed that we're in now, I have no stove. And my wife was willing to. She was in it. She was in it for the long haul.
So how long?
It's crazy.
We got to cut right there too. So how long did you live in your house?
2 years.
All right. So what did you cook on, Joe?
Electric skillet, a microwave, and a toaster oven. It's crazy. And she was a champ. We got pretty creative on making things on those 3 pieces. But yeah, I mean, we got a 20-foot bar in here. That was a priority.
Yeah.
No room for a stove, but we have a bar. So yeah, she was a trooper. She was a trooper. Yeah, you can't find many women like that. So I'm lucky. But yeah, it's stepping stone, right? And to your point, got to be on the same path as your spouse or significant other in regards to doing it, because it's a major investment.
Yeah, and I think for us, after that step, after we answered yes, this is the dream we want to chase. Yes, we're committed. I think was super important for us to sit down together and on paper and say, okay, what kind of criteria are we going to use to when we start looking at land? It's like looking at jewelry or clothes or big bucks. You start looking at them, you fall in love pretty quick. And so we spend a significant amount of time saying, what do we need to have? What are the criteria we're going to use to filter the land search down by?
We have a good friend in Omaha that's considering selling her home and owning a piece of property. And I think she's just right in the beginning stages of trying to factor in what's her criteria. So she starts out with looking at property. And I think through that, she's starting to formulate what her criteria is. Because, I mean, when you just first go out, I mean, there's tons of property out there. But as you start to narrow it down, what kind of community you want to live in, right? So how far do you want to be from civilization? You say that, but it's kind of true. And do you want to live on a hard surface road, soft surface road, health care? All those types of things start to factor in.
Family. How far are you able to live away from family? And because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but all 3 of us lived for quite a while in suburbia, right?
Yeah.
Houses side by side, and they were not very far away. And if we needed something at Walmart or a grocery store, it's a 5-minute drive. And that kind of deal, and it's just not that way
No.
with most landage fund.
I go by the old house periodically after work or at lunch, and it's like, oh my gosh, I was that close to my neighbors. It's like now you come out here and I can't see any neighbors. It's just, it's like I don't think I'd ever go back. It's crazy.
Not having neighbors next door enables you to be able to do anything you want when you
Exactly.
go outside.
Exactly.
I'm not sure what you're trying to say there, Tim, but
60 acres of a lavatory.
yeah, I didn't hear Joe say they put in a septic yet.
Just a hole in the wall.
Advice from your standpoint? What?
I think we've basically covered them. For us, we weren't actively looking for property. It was on our list, but we weren't active, and so we had looked at 2-3 pieces of property. Timing wasn't right for us for a variety of reasons I won't go into today. And again, this piece of property came up, and it was very close to a bullseye for what we were looking for. But again, I just can't go. I can't say enough about how important it is to have your spouse as part of that process. And so after we went, the owner of the farm actually drove us around in his vehicle all around the whole property, and in the middle of winter. And when we got back, and when we drove home, and we lived over in Council Bluffs, Omaha area, my wife and I talked about it, and that's like as we went through the criteria, it hit all of them except for one. And the one was we were hoping to be a little closer proximity to family and friends, but to think that you're going to wait for that perfect piece of property that's going to check every box, it's just never going to happen. It's never going to happen. And so that's some of the stuff we talked about, and we are pretty diligent at having 3-year plans, and we basically said, it's like, well, let's see it. We are going to do this, or we're going to take it off our list. And so we bought it. So I know this isn't exactly what we talked about. So after we bought the property, we were then it's like, well, now what?
Yeah.
You
Check that off the list. You got that.
I got it. So now what am I supposed to do? And I'll be honest, it took us probably, there was a period of about 6 months trying to figure out, hey, now that we've got this beautiful piece of property, how does it fit into our plan? And we ended up selling our place. We lived on a lake. That wasn't in our plan. Sold our house, early retirement, and moved to southern Iowa. And I got to tell you, my relatives were all saying we were crazy.
Sounds like a reality TV show, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
So we talked about spouses and their important role. Is there anything else you guys like to add for this episode for our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I think let's maybe just round table this a little bit. Again, we talked about tips, but what failures, what would you do differently next time? Anything you do different next time, Tim, if you're going to buy some property?
So I think it's important to know what's the value of land for an area, right? So, I mean, because land is a fluctuating thing. The banks aren't super open to loaning lots of money against farmland or timber, for that matter. So I think it's important to understand the property values, and I think that's probably the biggest one from me. I felt like I had a good pulse check on it, but that was through collaboration with you. And if I hadn't been collaborating with you, I'm not sure I would have had that as handily as what I needed. So I think that's pretty important.
Cool. Joe? Anything you do different?
Probably the one thing that jumps out, me a little sentimental here, is, prior to buying the land, talk to your friends and see what their visions are also. If I love where I'm at, but obviously, eastern Iowa versus southwest Iowa, that's probably the biggest thing. Talk to your friends and figure it out. But love where I'm at, but it'd be kind of cool to be
We could have had our own
to you
community.
guys. Exactly. We could have took
We'd
over
double the
town.
size of our community. What do you mean? If Joe moved down there.
Exactly. Exactly. No, it's just stay the course. There'll be obstacles on the way, but stay the course. If you want it, it'll work out. So
Yeah, I think we did this, but I think I could have been more diligent around it. And as you know, what's the old saying? You can't change your neighbors, and you can't change your relatives. And so we interviewed one of our neighbors, but I wish we would have. It wouldn't have changed our decision, but I think it would have helped transition us into it a little bit better. And
It's a big one.
that's true.
It's a
it
big
could have bit us. And I guess that's what I would throw out there to our listeners is you cannot do your due diligence enough around research of the land and interviewing the neighbors, and go in and have a beer at the bar and say, hey, I'm thinking about buying this land. What do you know about it? Or you know anybody that knows anything about it? Or this, that, and the other. And because it's after you live there as long as we have, it's think about all the information we have about our property now.
Exactly.
That we didn't have 5-6 years ago or whatever the number was because of people we talked to.
It's well put. Well put.
Yeah.
All right. So our next episode, Joel, is
Yeah, so our next episode number 2, is going to be on, this is all about land, but we really want to give folks some tools on working with a realtor, working with land acquisition. How do you do that? What's available to people with tools? So we are going to have a special guest with us again on the podcast. And Dirk has been in the real estate, specifically buying land out in the country for a long time. And I worked with Dirk on buying our property. It was with Whitetail's properties back then, and I have the utmost respect on his knowledge and his perspective on it. And I know it's going to be a great episode. So really show up and have your volume turned up for this one, because you're going to learn a lot.
Yeah, I look forward to it. We'd love to hear from our listeners. If you like where we're headed and you like some of the content that we're doing, please like or subscribe to our channels. And then until next time, be safe, have fun, get outdoors. This is the Two Dumbasses, and thank you, JB.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
Thanks, JB. Thanks for listening or watching our show. We have some exciting topics and guests coming up.
We ask that you subscribe to our channel on YouTube and follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
We look forward to hearing your suggestions for topics,
Questions and comments. This is Two Dumbasses signing off. Until next time,
Be safe,
have fun, and get
get
outdoors.
outdoors.